Hello YouTube, Goratha here. First, let me say I'm a big YouTube noob, so any and all feedback is appreciated. Let's talk about Spark Inquisitor. Over the last few days and early in the league, I have been asked a ton of questions on stream about my Spark build. So I thought I'd just make a YouTube video guide. It should serve as a nice point of reference for people wanting to try it out. This is my first YouTube video guides ever, and part of the reason why I'm making it is in patch 3.8, there will be no balance changes at all. This build will be exactly the same. And I feel confident that most of you will enjoy this build, and it'll be a very good league starter, and a good build in general for all content. I managed to hit level 98 in SF Hardcore with this build, and this league, and in the hardest gauntlet ever, I hit 1 to 90 in 12 hours with it. So I'm pretty confident about it. Okay, let's get into it. First, I want to talk about how Spark works mechanically, as it can be pretty complicated as a gem compared to others. There are important things to know about Spark to understand how it does its damage, and why your PvE DPS might be lying to you. An easy way to visualize Spark is by thinking about it in terms of cast, and not by number of projectiles. So every cast of Spark fires 8 projectiles. Only one of these does damage to a single monster. However, this is important to know because every 0.66 milliseconds, one of those 8 projectiles can deal damage again. This doesn't mean all 8 deal damage again, it means you have 8 tries to do damage again. This is a good time to talk about Spark's interaction with Pierce. When you have no Pierce with Fork, and you hit an enemy with Spark, it'll disappear. However, if you add Pierce in, it will move through the enemy and be able to do damage again. This is very important for high density maps like Beyond. One more important thing to know about Spark is projectile speed. You can think of projectile speed as clear speed. You can easily understand why you want to scale projectile speed, duration, and cast speed. Okay, so before I get into the gear, the links, the tree, and whatnot, I figured I'd show you guys a quick map just to show you how the build performs while mapping, so you have a good idea of whether or not you want to play the build or not. I figured I'd show some footage first. Unfortunately, I don't really have any footage of the bosses I did this league. I pretty much did every boss this league on this character. The only boss I didn't do was the Feared, which I'm pretty sure this character would have destroyed the Feared. I just didn't get a Chila and didn't get a Cortex Witness in time before I stopped playing it. This character would have demolished it, I'm pretty sure. Every other boss I did on this character was a complete joke. Pretty much just space sync everything. I would say the only fight that wasn't a complete joke was the Exarch, and I mean it was just a bit slower. It wasn't like it was hard or anything. The fight was a bit slower because there's no walls at all. And even then, at a certain point, I got to the point where I was skipping all the phases anyway from that as well. So you get to the point of Spark where you don't even care about walls, which is kind of the point I'm at in this character. But yeah, as you can see, the clear speed is very satisfying with the Herald of Ice, and we're pretty tanky. Nothing really bothers us at all. I guess facing the Ice Nova and not really care too much. Of course, ideally you're not facing that in hardcore. If you can help it, normally. I'm pretty confident this character's defenses though. I'm not too worried about dying in this map. I even do Minotaur with vulnerability on me. I'm not too afraid. So the way this build works is you press Frost Shield and then you use your focus, which spawns the Tornado and the Sigil. Yeah, there you go. There's a nice quick example of the mapping speed of this character and the boss damage and how easily you can just space sync everything. Yeah, I'll get into the gear and whatnot in a second. Now let's get into the fun part: the passive tree, the links, and the gear, and the problems we have to solve with this build. I always think about Inquisitor builds in 2 stages: pre-Uberlab and Uberlab. Basically non-crit and crit, as this is what decides when you switch, which makes it pretty easy in my opinion. First, I want to show how the tree looks before Uberlab, and go step by step allocating points and explaining why it takes certain things at certain levels. I start by taking all the early damage nodes, and then we grab Precision. Precision helps a lot with attack and cast speed. We'll need some dexterity later as well. And then we grab the temporary life and the damage while we're here. At this point, we make a beeline for EO. Now, there's 2 ways you can path to EO: the point efficient way, or the efficient way later. I would recommend just doing it the efficient way later. It'll be a bit worse early on, but you won't have to worry about resecking. At this point, we grab Crackling Speed, and we grab the Lightning Mastery. Lightning damage with non-critical strikes is lucky. Once you have both EO and this Lightning Mastery, your damage will skyrocket, and honestly, you could probably clear maps at this point. It's that OP. While you're here, you grab Cast Speed, and a life. And you grab Witch Life and Lightning Walker. All these items are very efficient, so you may as well grab them while you're here. And you can grab the Mastery too. At this point, I make a beeline for the Aura reservation. This is a good point to do that, because you can run Determination as soon as you grab it, which helps a lot for hardcore especially. But even softcore, it's nice to have some defensive layers. After that, we head to the middle. The middle is where we get our first duration. Duration is very important for this build, as we discussed earlier. Grab the Mastery, Ash, Frost, and Storm, Iron Will. Iron Will is very good for this build, as we are an Inquisitor and we get a decent amount of strength from our tree. So this is extra damage early, and this is nice in general. And we grab the life over here. At this point, you can grab the Life Mastery, 10% increase maximum life, and reduce life cover rate. And the interesting thing to note about this Mastery is for Inquisitor, it's less of a downside because it only affects your life recovery and not the ES regen rate. Which is pretty nice. At this point, we have most of the important stuff. You can start filling out life if you want, and we're just going to start heading over to Melding, Nimbleness, and Instinct. Once you get Instinct, you can choose the Mastery, 10% chance to suppress, or you could wait and get the crit Mastery later. Or you can just respec it, that's fine too. But the crit chance is really good later when we switch to crit. At this point, you're almost ready to go crit, honestly, but you're not high enough level, most likely to do Uberlab. So just fill out points, get like Written in Blood and Influence. These nodes are very solid as well. And you can also get the jewel nodes if you want. You have some good jewels laying around. This is when you're actually ready to go crit. Hopefully you can go crit here. Otherwise you just can grab some more life. And this is the non-crit tree. One important thing to note is mana might become an issue. If mana is an issue for you, you can grab the Caster Mastery. Spells cause you to gain mana equal to their upfront cost every 5th time you pay it. If that somehow isn't enough, like you find an early 6-link or using a Tabula or whatnot, I wouldn't recommend a Tabula, by the way, but if you do use a 6-link and you have mana issues early on, you can run the Dreamer nodes. This will pretty much solve all your mana issues immediately. At this point, you're ready to go crit, and hopefully you can go crit. The crit tree looks very similar. Luckily, it doesn't change very much. The only thing you do is drop EO and change the Lightning Mastery. You want to have the 80% increased critical strike against shocked enemies. And ideally, by the time you actually spec the node for crit, you want to have Arcane Potency. This will help you a lot damage-wise. After you go crit, you want to grab Doomcast as well, and the Mastery. Increase effect of non-damaging elements you inflict on critical strikes. Honestly, non-damaging elements are extremely broken right now in the game. I would recommend almost any build where you use ailments, you want to have non-damaging ailments. Especially if you have Shocker, good Shocker chill. And this is pretty much the crit tree. I will show you the in-game tree, and I'll explain why I'm using the Power Charge node in the in-game tree. This is currently how my in-game tree looks. The only reason I have Disciple of the Forbidden is because I have a specific chest implicit, which I'll talk about when I talk about the gear. But normally you won't need these nodes here. And that's the passive tree. For the bandit, you want a Lyra. A Lyra is very, very important. Not only do you get all res early, which helps with gearing, you get crit multi later, but the most important thing is actually the mana regen. Mana is kind of a problem with this build. For some reason, GG hates casters and makes you need a lot of mana to cast, which yeah, whatever. This helps you a lot with that. If you don't have a Lyra, honestly, the build is almost unplayable early on. You'll be a struggle for sure. You won't want to do that. For our lab, we almost always go Sanctuary into Brightest Path. For Merc Lab, you can go Augury early if you want, but you'll have to respec it when you go to Merc Lab, or when you go to Uber Lab, and grab Righteous Providence and Inevitable Judgment. This is when you go in crit. And that is the skill tree and the Ascendancy nodes. Now let's talk about gym links. First, let's talk about early leveling links. For Spark early on, you want Spark, Pierce, Add Lightning, or Onslaught, depending on whatever colors you get. I prefer Onslaught, but Add Lightning will give you a little bit of extra damage. Once you get to Act 2, you can replace Add Lightning with Faster Casting. While leveling, we use Orb of Storms, which unfortunately we drop later, but is very good early on in Act 1 through 10, especially in early white maps as well. Orb of Storms, you can run Ice Fight, Onslaught, and Alley Prolif. This provides a lot of nice utility. You can also run Flame Wall and Holy Flame Tone if you wish, if you really want some extra damage, but honestly, it's not really required. If you're a newer player or less mechanically gifted, I can also recommend running Decoy Totem. This will make early bosses a lot easier, and just act bosses easier in general. You'll be able to put them on a wall and spark into the wall, which is pretty nice. You have the optional level of Wands or Scepters. The reason you level with Scepters is for Leap Slam. I'd recommend against this for most players. I would just stick with Wands. It's a lot easier and less complicated. It's mostly preference anyways, though. For early auras, we'll be running Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice. And Determination once we get the Mastery and Aura nodes. The curse we're using is called Sniper's Mark. Sniper's Mark is honestly one of the most broken curses in the game, and it is no exception for this build. In Act 6, most likely you'll be starting to put on a shield, and at that point you can run shield charge and faster attacks. Also, throw in cast damage taken, and what we'll call pretty much as soon as you put on Determination, or whenever you get the extra links. Now let's talk about the one thing that makes this build extremely broken that I really haven't touched on yet. Tornado. Tornado is honestly one of the most broken skills in the game, and I think it's criminally underused. Tornado has the advantage of doing damage while you're moving, which is really nice. We run Tornado as soon as possible, ideally with increased duration. Unfortunately, if you're playing SSF, you don't get Tornado until Act 6. If you're playing in Trade League, you can trade for it earlier, which is definitely worth it in my opinion. Tornado is a bit complicated mechanically, but basically it has an initial duration, which you shoot projectiles into it, which then snapshot the damage, and it has a secondary duration, which does damage for a duration based on that damage. And the good part about this is we're actually scaling duration already for Spark, so it has some pretty good synergy for that. I will link a video in the description that explains it far more in depth than that if you're interested. Later on, we run Sigil of Power and Frost Shield. However, this is most likely when you're dropping Orb of Storms. You're not going to really have links to run everything. Unfortunately, you have to decide between them. I think I would run Orb of Storms for early white maps, and for later on when you're bossing, switch to Sigil. Frost Shield, however, is pretty important when you go crit. It's also just very good in general to put down whenever you're attacking. The playstyle is basically Frost Shield, Sand in it when you're self-casting, which gives you a lot more tankiness and damage, and slows the enemy. For the Spark links on a 4-link, we're going to be running Spark, Master Casting, or Spell Echo with Pierce and Inspiration. For Spell Echo, it really is preference. I don't like using it early on until I get a lot of cast speed nodes or cast speed on gear, but Spell Echo is more damage. So if you like damage, Spell Echo is definitely the way to go. I wouldn't recommend in hardcore though until you have good cast speed. It'll basically stun you in place. The 5th link is Lightning Pin. For crit, you just drop Lightning Pin for crit strikes. Crit strikes replaces Lightning Pin. And then for the 6th link, you use crit damage. Also later on with all the aura nodes, you can run Zealotry or Grace instead of Herald Lightning. I would recommend you go Grace early on in hardcore, and you grab Ghost Shrouds. For softcore, I would pretty much always just run Zealotry. You could also run Zealotry in hardcore if you're an experienced player. You'll do a lot more damage. It's nice. And if you guys want my exact links, I will post the PB in the description, and you can see exactly where I put all my gems. Okay, time for the gear. Gearing on Spark isn't too complicated, but you'll want to keep an eye out for certain items early on and for certain stats. I will go over a couple of options for each piece, and I will go over what I chose to do specifically on this character. So for your wand, I would recommend putting Profane Wand on your filter and Pagan Wand, which is the lower version of this wand. You'll want to have a lot of cast speed on this build, and that's just an easy way to get cast speed. Honestly, early on, I would recommend just getting any wand at all that has projectile speed. You just really want projectile speed and cast speed. You can just craft like flat damage or something. This would be fine. You're going to want to use a shield. I went with just a Cardinal Shield. It has the most armor and evasion. You just generally want like life suppression res on the shield and whatnot like that. This one has percent life and lightning damage is chaos, which is kind of insane, but you don't need anything that crazy. For the helmet, you're just looking for life and suppression. We do want focus craft for the helmet. I ran a focus with Tornado and Sigil of Power in this character. Without focus, Tornado feels a little clunky to use, and you have a lot more ramp up time. So you really want to just have that like focus click, which is instant cast. just to make the build feel smoother and not have as much ramp, which is definitely a problem for a lot of builds. They have like 50 billion DPS, but then they have like 10 seconds of ramping. They put down like Sigil, a Tornado, and freaking takes them 10 seconds before they actually cast a damaging spell. Focus helps a lot with that. That's kind of why I went Focus Helm in that. So yeah, it's pretty good. Why I had the Power Charge node, this random node up here with increased charge duration. I had the Frenzy Charge implicit. So every 15 seconds I gain a Frenzy Charge. And I decided to run increased charge duration for that. However, there is a better way to go about this. You can get a better implicit, like just a higher quality implicit, like gain Frenzy Charge every like 12 seconds, for example. And then run 3 jewels with 10% Frenzy Charge duration. This will pretty much replace 6 points, which is definitely ideal. I was playing SSF, I didn't have the option to do that. But that is a very good option to do. Oh yeah, for the implicits, I guess I should go over the implicits as well, huh? I just had damage implicits on my helm. I think you can get something like reduce mana efficiency and stuff like that. I don't think the helm implicits is that important, but I just had some extra damage on my helmet. Oh, for the enchant, you definitely want a Spark enchant if you're playing on Trade League. Pretty much any of the Spark enchants are better than what I had. I would recommend Spark damage or Spark projectile speed. That would be my personal preference, but honestly, any of them are probably fine. For the chests, I had life recovery and the Frenzy Charge. I would definitely do that if you can. Now let's talk about the gloves. So I was using Algor Mortis on this character, and I was scaling a lot of non-damaging ailment effects. Algor Mortis are really interesting because you're using Frost Shield, so you're always pretty much in a chilling area. You're always sapping the enemy, and you're always increasing the lightning damage they take. These are definitely a very solid option. They are a bit rare. They're tier 2, I think. So they're kind of rare. You can definitely get them in Trade League pretty easily. I would recommend using them. However, there is something to be said. You end up running Vortex on left click, which makes it a bit more annoying to see things on the ground. You'll see this in it. You'll see this when I show the Exile kill, where I'm standing in degens randomly because I can't see them. That is one big downside about the Algor Mortis. You can just run a pair of rare gloves if you want with the Pierce Implicit. Pierce Implicit's really solid. With suppression and life and res. That would be an option as well, and just don't go for the sap. The sap does make it so you can kind of AFK some bosses though, which is definitely nice. For the boots, you just want suppression, life, and move speed. This is where you can get Canopy Chilled, which is definitely a really solid option. Yeah, nothing too crazy. Some life regen, move speed. The enchant is definitely going to be lightning damage if you haven't killed recently though. Or life regenerate is also really solid in Inquisitor. Just a couple options for the boot enchant. They're all pretty good. For the amulet, there is a couple options. I end up using just a rare amulet because I found a pretty crazy cascade fractured amulet. And I ran Crit Multi and Projectile Speed on it with anointed Fairy Bolts. Which you really do want to anoint Fairy Bolts pretty much on every character, I would say. Like every Spark character. It's just a lot of projectile speed for very cheap anoint. Later on, if you want, you can also go Long Shot. Long Shot is a bit more damage and a bit more projectile speed. That's definitely an option as well. It's a lot more expensive though. The other option for Amulet is Ashes of the Stars. It's definitely something I should mention. It gives you a lot of projectile speed, and it's just a good amulet in general. So it's definitely worth mentioning. You can also run that. For the rings, I just ran double Vermilion rings. I had some pretty good mana stuff on the rings. There is one thing for this build you do have to look out for. You need some mana on gear, like mana regen on gear, and a little bit of dexterity on gear. This ring kind of solved both of those problems for me. But you do want to get some dex on gear, most likely, to level up Sniper's Mark. I mean, worst case scenario though, you just don't level up Sniper's Mark and don't need as much dexterity. But if you're running Grace, you need it anyways. For the belt, just a random Stygian with some res and life, nothing too crazy. Same with the Jill, nothing too crazy. For later on, there is an option to run Glorious Vanity. I would recommend it. It's definitely pretty solid. This could corrupt the soul where Mind Over Matter is. This is definitely worth doing. Always good for Inquisitor to have Glorious Vanity because you're taking damage on life and ES at the same time, which means your regen is being fully utilized. So Inquisitor has the same life regen as ES regen, so you want to have some sort of effect like that. There is a new belt that been added to the game, which does a similar thing. You might be able to use that in this build as well. I don't know exactly what it's called off the top of my head, but it has a similar effect. Then I set a random jewel, which actually has the frenzy implicit I was talking about. I was trying to go for that, I just didn't make it there in this character. Yeah, crit multi is very good for this build as well. And yeah, that is the gear. I guess one more thing I should talk about. Pretty much every character that you should be running this league should have flasks that have on hit. You want to be using flasks that have on hit, like charges when you get hit. Ideally, your Quicksilver also has cast speed. I liked running cast speed on my Quicksilver, and just percent armor on my Granite. And yeah, that is the gear. Again, I'll link the PB in the description. You guys can take a look at my gear and my flask and whatnot more in depth. Yeah, I think that about covers it, guys. I think we went over everything we wanted to. But as you can see, the damage on this build is pretty nutty. My gear is pretty nice. Yeah, 8.5 million DPS with 5 sparks. Like we talked about earlier, duration scales the amount of times the sparks can hit. And we're getting about 4 to 5. Even at 4, it's 7 million. Like worst case scenario, it's like 5 million. That's not even including a tornado. Tornado will be like another 30 to 50% damage, depending on if you're moving or not. Yeah, I think that covers it, guys. I will try not to make this too long. It's already kind of long. But yeah, thanks for watching. I appreciate any feedback you guys have. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked it. Yeah, thanks for watching.